Welcome, bienvenue. I am Karine Morin, President and CEO of the Federation for the Humanities and Social Sciences. Today's event is taking place in English. Simultaneous interpretation is available in French, American Sign Language, and Quebec Sign Language. Closed captioning is also provided in both English and French. Nous offrons aujourd'hui des services d'interprétation simultanée et sous-titrage en anglais, en français, ainsi que l'interprétation langue des signes québécoise. To access sign language interpretation, in-person attendees can refer to the screen next to the stage. Virtual attendees can enable on-screen sign language interpretation by clicking the globe icon at the bottom of their screen. To access French interpretation and captions, those in the room need to scan the QR code on the screen behind me or as you entered the rooms on the posters. This will take you to Zoom webinar. Once in the Zoom webinar, those joining us virtually already are there, and you will click on the globe icon, you'll select your preferred language, and you'll listen using your own earpieces. Click the closed caption button to choose your preferred caption language. So those were the logistical details of this event. I now want to move on to a land acknowledgement. If you are joining us virtually, we recognize that the following land acknowledgement might not be for the territory that you are currently on. We ask that if this is the case, you take the responsibility to acknowledge the traditional territory you're on and the current treaty holders. We begin by acknowledging that George Brown College, where we're gathered here today, is located on the traditional territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation and other Indigenous peoples who have lived here over time. We are grateful to share this land as treaty people who learn, work, and live in community with each other. As we gather to explore the future of artificial intelligence, we are reminded that innovation is not value neutral. Technologies we build reflect the choices we make. Grounding ourselves in this land acknowledgement is a call to honor Indigenous knowledge systems, which have long emphasized interconnectedness, relational accountability, and stewardship of resources. On to today's session. Au nom de la Fédération des sciences humaines et du Collège George Brown, j'ai l'énorme plaisir de vous accueillir à la première causerie Voir Grand du 94e Congrès des sciences humaines, les technologies du vivre-ensemble, comment façonner un avenir équitable grâce à l'intelligence artificielle. Technologies of Togetherness, shaping an equitable future with artificial intelligence. The Big Thinking lecture series at Congress brings together scholars and public figures to address some of the most pressing issues of our time. Today, Heather Krauss and Deborah Lamb will draw on their work in ethical technology development, inclusive innovation, and cross-sector collaboration to explore how AI can support equity, transparency, and collective well-being. In a brief sentence about each of our panelists and moderator, Heather Krauss has over 2 decades of experience in data science and is the founder of We All Count, a global initiative that embeds equity into every stage of data projects. Deborah Lamb is the founding executive director of the Partnership for Inclusive Innovation, where she leverages a global career in innovation and public sector leadership to champion inclusive, tech-enabled solutions for communities. They are joined by moderator Ryan Morrison, a passionate educator and researcher at George Brown College, who explores how emerging technologies, such as large language models, can support and transform learning. Thank you to them for joining us today. Thank you to you for joining us today. For this session, and as Congress continues, you can participate in the conversation on social media using the hashtag CongressSSH, or Congress with an H at the end. And on behalf of the Federation and George Brown, I would like to thank the Big Thinking Lecture Series sponsors. For the entire series, Universities Canada, but today the session sponsor is the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council, SSHRC. Please join me in welcoming Sylvie Lemereux, Vice President of Research at SSHRC, who will introduce today's conversation. Bienvenue, Sylvie.
Thank you, Karine, for your warm welcome. Bonjour à tous et à toutes. Je suis vraiment heureuse d'être parmi vous aujourd'hui. I will begin in English, and I'll warn you ahead of time when I'm switching to French. SSHRC is a long-standing partner of the Federation for the Humanities and Social Sciences, and very proud to sponsor this important conversation. I have the pleasure of introducing this year's Big Thinking panelists who will explore how we can shape an ethical future with technologies like artificial intelligence, that are increasingly infiltrating our lives. Our panelists will offer a range of perspectives on the themes of technologies of togetherness. While there is much to be said about the potential of new and disruptive technologies for social good, it's impossible to ignore the many fears and anxieties that abound over how such tools are being deployed and the unintended consequences of them. Some of the architects and early adopters of AI technology are now sounding this alarm. Because we know from technology's historical track record, in the hands of human beings, science and technological advances are not neutral. I'll be switching to French. Cette réalité renforce l'importante croissance des sciences humaines. En effet, la recherche en sciences humaines est essentielle pour étudier et documenter de nouveaux phénomènes. Elle fournit les outils, les connaissances et les perspectives sur la condition humaine nécessaires pour aborder l'intelligence artificielle et les autres technologies en rapide évolution, tout en plaçant l'éthique et l'équité à l'avant-plan. En outre, la recherche en sciences humaines offre des perspectives qui peuvent aider à comprendre les opportunités économiques ainsi que les répercussions de ces nouvelles technologies. Compte tenu des recherches avant-gardistes menées au Canada dans le domaine de l'intelligence artificielle, il semble tout à fait normal et indiqué que notre pays soit aussi un chef de file mondial dans le domaine de la recherche servant à relever les défis humains et sociaux liés à cette révolution technologique. I'll switch back to English. SSHRC has supported groundbreaking research to guide society in addressing these complex issues. For instance, the research of Erin Tal, a Canada Research Chair at McGill University, whose work deals with the epistemic and ethical dimensions of big data and machine learning algorithms. Today, we will benefit from the experience and expertise of three speakers whose diverse backgrounds will further enrich our knowledge of the impacts of AI in the short, medium, and long term. As Karine indicated, Heather Krauss, our first panelist, is a data scientist. She's a cross-sector thought leader in data equity issues who works on government, social sector, education, and corporate data projects. Her company works globally with national governments, transnational corporations, and the largest players in the non-governmental organization space. Her approach to project design, data collection, analysis, reporting, and visualization have placed her in high demand as a project lead, a crisis consultant, and on a speaker on data equity. Our second panelist, Deborah Lamb, is the founding director of the Partnership for Inclusive Innovation in the U.S. The statewide public-private partnership invests in innovative solutions for shared economic prosperity. She also leads smart communities and urban innovation work at Georgia Tech. Deborah previously served as Pittsburgh inaugural Chief of Innovation and Performance, where she oversaw technology, sustainability, performance, and innovation functions of city government. Before that, she was a management consultant at a global engineering and design firm. Our third panelist, who will be doing double duty, as Karine indicated as our moderator, Ryan Morrison, is an educational technology specialist with 10 years of experience teaching both English as a second language and communications at various colleges in Ontario, including here at George Brown. Ryan develops novel curricula with a focus on 21st century approaches to education. He is particularly interested in addressing technological gaps with the tech and between tech and post-secondary education worlds. His current research concerns artificial intelligence and its impact on the language arts. I am very much looking forward to their perspectives and insights, and I want to thank all of you, Ryan, Heather, Deborah, in advance for what promises to be a thought-provoking discussion. Un grand merci à vous tous et toutes. Merci.
Hi, welcome everybody. Hope you're enjoying your time here at George Brown College. I want to start off today with a question about data gathering, and this happens, I'm sure, to all of us. We do something. So for example, a few weeks ago, I took a train trip to my hometown of London, Ontario, and I've been doing this for 20 years, going back and forth on the train, and then I got this survey, and it said it was going to be 15 minutes long to take this survey. It was going to be, there was no incentive to do it. And I find that a little bit problematic, that I'm being kind of cold called to give my time to inform how my train trip was, which, by the way, has not changed at all in 20 years. It's the same service. It's the exact same thing. So I want to put it to the panelists. What are some of the problems with how we are collecting data? What does a survey like this miss?
Thank you very much for having us. And it's great to see you all this morning. I think it's morning or afternoon now.
A little bit.
And Ryan, that's a very common experience, I think. That's a important way to kind of ground the conversation, because I know we're all here for our experience with AI, and AI is such an abstract word that it's very easy for these conversations to spin off into abstraction and either glory or horror, none of which is 100% true. So, like, in terms of the way that we collect data and how we think about data, I think that is a really good place to start in terms of thinking about AI and how technology for togetherness can be encouraged, because that really is one of the earliest places that we see the level of thoughtfulness and the level of intention and the power dynamics that are going to be baked into everything else that happens. Exploring, and you know, the train example is a great example, and it comes from your real life, so I really like that. And I also know that we're with a lot of, I presume, researchers, academics who love research. I also love research. And it can be very easy to kind of see that as a dichotomous thing, like, sure, like Metrolinx or Via Rail or, you know, name your transportation corporation, they're going to collect data without offering us anything because they're like the evil corporate overlords. But we in the sociology department or the psychology department or the whatever hospitality department, when we collect data, we're doing it for good. And really, the thing that I've found over the years is that we need to think about data collection as a social contract. And there is price, there is ownership, there is access, there is control that are all involved in the data relationship, in the social contract that happens every time data is collected. And the person collecting that data has many choices to make, and the person offering or selling or donating that data also has many choices to make. And the idea that there is one correct relationship is going to be a waste of our time. Rather, we really want to learn to pay attention to the choices that are getting made in that data relationship and who those choices are going to benefit. And that's the attitude I would take towards getting asked, and that's the attitude I would take towards all the other choices we're going to talk about today in relation to AI. I don't know, you took transportation here. Did they give you a survey?
Yeah, thank you for having me here. Good afternoon. I'll hone in on a specific question I would have around this data, which is how are they going to use it? Because I think that's the most important question for me as an incentive. So for example, if I took the train and had this survey and I respond, well, the train was kind of dirty, there was garbage everywhere, or I didn't feel as safe because of some security precautions, etc. I put in time to do that. And the next time I take the train, it's a lot cleaner, or there are safer standards. Like, am I able to see the results from that survey or that information I take? Right, that to me is a major incentive. And I'm gonna hone in more on the community aspect of this, because as researchers, a lot of times we get a big grant and we go into a community and we spend years building trust into the community, right? And in that trust building process, we're collecting data. And the community is seeing this. But then we go off and publish that information or that research in some sort of peer-reviewed journal academic article, and we see success. But what does the community see? What do they actually see in terms of improvements into their living conditions or improvements into their well-being? It's that linkage that we spend a lot of time honing in, as in we have a contract where if you give me data, I will try to incorporate this data into research that could improve your livelihoods or do something that you would see the beneficial impacts. Oftentimes, I have seen where the grant finishes, so you have no more funding, and the researcher goes on to the next project. So then there's a trust that's broken in the community, where the community sees that that researcher goes off to another project, and then that community is left with very little to show for that data contract. So at the end of the day, whether I am filling in a survey about a train, something small, or I am a community member working with a researcher about energy or housing or whatever issue, something larger, I want to be able to see that there's something that's translated to me in terms of application and translation.
Absolutely. And I just want to pick up on what you said there about the relationship with the community. We have to also think about the future of research. When if we do something like break that trust, and we see this in many communities, particularly in Indigenous communities in Canada, that since that trust is broken, they are no longer interested in having another researcher.
Correct.
And so again, this is, I think that trust is a very sacred thing that we definitely might not be thinking about when we get that,
right.
that
And
grant.
it's the institutional trust that you have to think about. So it's no longer you, Ryan, as a professor going into the community, talking to this one individual. It's you representing the institution that you come from, going into the community and working with that community. So at the end of the day, you want to be able to build institutional data trust beyond. So you're paving the way for future researchers to come in because they have this understanding, this is what research can mean to me, this is how research can translate, I have direct experience in history in the past, and I can build from it. And it'll be easier to do so knowing that you are stepping on the footsteps of people who have made the foundation stronger.
For sure. I want to move kind of forward in the data process, if you will, away from collection and into the data itself. And in our session description, we saw data can be harmful, right? Especially to equity-deserving groups. How can and I want to keep on this train, if you will, of real examples. How have you seen real examples of how data can be harmful to communities?
Well, let me tell you a couple of examples of data that has helped in terms of this, because I think that shares what we've learned from in the past in terms of harmfulness. So to us in terms of our community research projects. So we're based in Atlanta. We have lots of community research projects all over the state and the Southeast region. And how we always think about these community research projects is, one, you start with the problem first, right? Whatever the problem is, you know, whether it is housing or energy or transportation, whatever that problem is. And we always think of ourselves as research and tech agnostic. And this is very important because we don't go in with any particular solution. So if you tell an engineer, you know, this is the problem, they'll think of a singular engineering solution. Or if you do the same thing with a public policy professor or researcher. So, you know, what are the range of multidisciplinary solutions that could come to address the problem? Secondly, with the technology, right? We don't go in with any silver bullet solution and say, you know, if you only installed this piece of hardware, or if you only had this sensor, then you would be able to solve all your problems, right? And if anything, we've seen what I call a tech arms race, where a community will say, I have, you know, 3,000 sensors, therefore, you know, my problems are solved, I am very smart. And then another community can say, I have 4,000 sensors, I am smarter than this community, or, you know, I can better solve these problems, right? So the research and tech agnostic part is a really important grounding in terms of you're going in first to understand the problem, understand what the data is, and this is where the data, to a point of you know, the harmful effects of data, is that understanding the data has to be grounded to be clean, non-biased, you know, updated. You know, you have to take a certain amount of understanding of what data you're given, and then use the data to ground your understanding in the research, so that then you can work on the different research solutions or the different technology solutions for that problem. So that's how we have framed data, but also understanding that there are limitations in data, right? Data cannot answer every single one of your questions. And if it can't answer every one of your single questions, what are the parameters that you have to put that will frame the research that will allow you to go forward knowing that you'll never get to perfection?
Great. I'm so excited to hear about the work that you're doing down in Georgia. I'm hoping to come and see it myself in person.
Everyone's invited.
Where the weather is warmer. And I really want to build on the last part of your sharing, Deborah, about how important it is to understand the data that you're working with. Because in terms of data harming people, the work that my company does mostly is with people who are not harming people on purpose, right? That's a whole thing. To use technology and data to attack people is actually incredibly easy. And that's something that we should all be aware of, but isn't really the problem that I think we're trying to talk about today. Today, we're trying to talk about the problem of unintentional, or that's very optimistic. Less intentional is probably realistic. Harm. And I think a lot of it does have to do with building on what Deborah was saying, really understanding the purpose of your program, the purpose of your research, and the nature of your data. One of the things that we see really consistently is there's this harmful, problematic myth that as long as we follow the right recipes, as long as we have the right tools, we can use data in a value-neutral way. And that is absolutely not true. I could spend the rest of the day with you talking through examples about how the very best statistical analysis is not value-neutral, and who it is good for and who it is bad for is inevitable. And sometimes the mathematical and human consequences of that are quite small, and sometimes they are quite significant. For example, we work a lot in the post-secondary education sector across different countries, and AI is huge there right now for a lot of different reasons. I'm not talking about like students and professors using AI, that's important, but I'm talking about using AI in the background to kind of do precision learning, to help students, especially students that might be, less likely to finish the degree that they signed up for and paid for, to help keep those students on the track that they said they wanted to be on. And one of the things that's happening is, for example, in certain parts of the world, there are 3 different types of nursing degrees. And I'm not going to go into the details of the nursing degrees, but one of them, you're going to get paid more, you're going to get a better job. One of them, you're going to get paid less, you're going to get a job with less opportunities, and then the middle one is in the middle. And when we simply run these AI tools and say, please help these students stay on track to complete the degrees, what happens is it almost like shockingly perfectly replicates all the racism and classism and sexism that you think it would replicate. And it does so with beautiful p-values and wonderful AOC curves and all of the diagnostics. But what it's doing is it's very, very good at scaling and making stuff like racism and classism very, very efficient. Now, this is not inevitable, and this is kind of where we get to our question, which is how do we prevent that? How do we take a tool that could actually probably do a really great job of deploying resources more effectively so that we had more equity in who got what nursing degrees and who got to provide care to what types of patients in what parts of various countries? And the answer to that is we have to pay very, very close attention to the nitty-gritty, step-by-step choices that are getting made in the material that's fed into this tool, and telling the tool what choices to make. I really wish that the person who came up with the marketing word artificial intelligence did not use the word intelligence. Artificial is cool, but intelligence is a marketing word that is lulling us into the idea that we are relieved of our responsibilities. And so by paying attention and telling these machines, these prediction algorithms, how we want them to make the choice, what exactly are we trying to get them to prioritize? Are we trying to get them to prioritize the number of people that graduate, the diversity of people that graduate, the quality of life of the people that graduate? Those are just 3 examples amongst, hundreds.
Absolutely. And I think kind of you brought up the idea of all the isms, right, that we talk about. And this concept of the digital divide for my, like when I hear what you're talking about is a algorithm that can help or harm my students, right? That if I could be told this student over here needs specific help with this and I'm not seeing that, that's great. But are we all able to use these tools, right? A lot of professionals don't have the skills or the knowledge or even the will to pick up a tool like this. So how do you encourage people to say, hey, maybe think about approaching this process a different way and incorporating some of these AI tools?
So let me give you a concrete example, because I feel like, to me, AI, and I'm glad we're honing in on this, AI is a very helpful tool to complement your existing critical thinking, existing work. And a good example is a project that we have in with Kansas State University is our 911. It's the emergency. Is
it's the same number here.
It's the same number?
Yeah.
Okay.
It
it's
works
like
both countries.
911. So it's the emergency line that you call for all emergencies, right? So AI to me is very useful for repetitive kind of low level kind of things so that you can get to people faster so that they can go deeper into this. So if you think about emergency rooms, a small percentage of people are responsible for a majority percentage of emergency room kind of visits, right? So it takes, that percentage. So we were doing this project with Kansas State University and the local healthcare system provider for mental health crisis. So if you have a mental health crisis and you call 911, can you get to a professional mental health provider as quickly as possible? And what they did was they mapped out the existing status quo, which is once you call the operator and you say, I have a mental health crisis, they will direct you to like 15 other, signs and roadmaps, and, it's 30 minutes later, you're holding, etc. And that's not what you need in a mental health crisis. A mental health crisis is a very specific kind of situation that requires very specific professional support. So this is where AI can come in and say, we can fast track this to get you to a person as quickly as possible so they can deal with this situation. So it never replaces the person, right? Because it can never replace the person because, again, mental health is a very specific situation, case by case, that requires a lot of nuance, that requires a lot of critical thinking that AI cannot replace. But what AI can do is actually map it out to get you to that person as quickly as possible and map it into that way. And so that's what we're testing in terms of a project, starting with a problem that if you have a mental health crisis, frankly, there's not enough providers, there's a lot of calls going unchecked, it could get more serious if it's not attended well. So AI provides the bottom repetitive, mapping out as quickly as possible to get you to that healthcare professional when you need it.
Absolutely.
That's such a fantastic example, Deborah. Thank you for, because I do think there are lots of really, really good uses of AI, and that's an exceptionally, that's actually been proven over a long time. That's not even new. Like we know, sorry, I'm not trying to say you're not doing innovation. You are doing innovation, but that's a very solid example that I think is going to help quite a number of people. And to kind of your point, Ryan, when you build a tool like that, there is no way that AI tool in helping support people in mental health crises is going to be equally good at supporting all kinds of people. There's going to be certain lived experiences, certain communities, simply by the way that AI takes words and abstract ideas and turns them into zeros and ones and decides which zeros and ones are more like the other zeros and ones. And so as we build those, we are deciding who's going to get prioritized. Is this AI support for mental health going to be the very, very fastest at this kind of mental health crisis, or the very, very fastest at this mental health crisis? And what we like to pretend is that we can make it equally good at all of them, and we can't. And so somebody somewhere, very much to Deborah's point, we cannot farm this out to AI. Humans have to stay in the loop. Who's going to get to make that decision? And that's where the work that Deborah's company, where there's actual meaningful collaboration with the people who are having those mental health crises, is essential. And no one should ever say to you some fancy computer science word, well, the AOC curve is better, and so we should use this one. That's not how humans want to make decisions about which, to your point, Ryan, which AI tool we want to use.
And I think this kind of feeds into the next part, where we're not really, because this is a great concrete example of something it's not policy-based, it's very clear that this is a crisis, this is a 911 call, we can all relate to that, we know what that is. But when we get to bigger, more abstract things like policy, is there bigger dangers that we should be aware of, or that you can tell us about, that are from the big data, that basing policy on this, that there's holes, that there's gaps, like you say, that some people are not being served?
I think I talked about this example actually in the green room. So we have in Georgia, there's a policy that was passed by the state that every high schooler needs to have some sort of computer science education or certificate, by the time they graduate, right? So on paper, this sounds great. Like, we should have all our students career ready for computer science. And computer science is the future, and they need to have this education. So, and it's very clear in terms of outcomes, right? So every person who graduates, senior year will have this. So on paper, it sounds great, right? But then if you actually peel back the onion, you think, actually, how are you going to implement this? One, do the existing teachers have computer science knowledge in order, or training sufficient to teach the students? Who's actually going to be training the students or teaching the students in computer science? What is the curriculum that you will ensure that, the student in this high school, has the same kind of computer science education and curriculum as this student in this high school? That's when you start to really get into the disparities that you talk about. So, we've had cases where you're just transitioning the biology teacher into the computer scientist, right? Because that's, what this high school has, right? Like, and is that biology teacher really equipped to teach computer science? No, but that's what you have. Or do you actually have the hardware or the tools, the coding, et cetera, that's necessary for it? So that's where I think we as a group need to consider, policy sounds great, outcomes sound great, but then how do you actually execute this? And are you actually perpetuating the same disparities that already exist that you're trying to actually counter, right? And that's where we had to go back and say, where are those communities that need more infrastructure, that need more resources, and how do you address those communities, knowing that, these communities, more or less, already have computer science degree or computer science classes. So, this policy doesn't affect them. They were already 5 years into doing this, so they're fine. So where can we put the resources to address this infrastructure problem? And are there more infrastructure problems that we have to deal with? So I think when we're talking about, career readiness or the advancement of AI and technology, it sounds all great as a great equalizer, but we have to think about where people are starting with in the first place.
Absolutely. Did we have our questions starting to come in? Are we, yeah? Do we want to start with some audience questions, or do we want to continue with this? Yeah.
Happy?
Okay, wonderful. And for those in the audience, if you want to submit questions, I'll read them out. You just need to scan the QR code that's up there, and it will take you to a form. But our first question from the audience is, for researchers working in and around AI, how do we balance the demands of rigorous, often slow-moving scholarship with the urgency of shaping fast-evolving technologies? What responsibilities do researchers have to not just generate knowledge, but to intervene in systems and structures in real time?
Go ahead.
That was a hard question. Yeah, I think, again, back to the green room, one thing that we were talking about is how I got into large language models and AI, and it was just something that kind of started from an interest that turned into, in 2022, you could really feel things heating up. We were following GPT-3 platforms very carefully, and every time our research group would meet, we would say, there's something new. There's something new is happening. Another organization is involved. NVIDIA just put in, $500 million, whatever it is. Things were happening so fast that we couldn't even settle on how we wanted to approach this. We knew we wanted to do, large language models and generative AI, academic integrity, but we couldn't really figure out a way to research it yet because it was moving so fast. We couldn't even decide which platform to use to do that. So I just said, whatever, I'm going to write a white paper. And it was fine, but again, within, it was within 2 years, it was almost irrelevant, right? Like everything that I had kind of put together was irrelevant. So I can't find a way to put those two things together, because good research, as we've been talking about, takes time, takes thoughtfulness, it takes a lot of people. And the other way, just going off on your own to try and do something, often the results are problematic.
Let me answer this. I love this question because it's something that we deal with a lot, very specifically. So we address this through pilots and MVPs phased. And the reason why is that we have an ecosystem and we deal with a lot of different types of stakeholders. So your private sector stakeholder is looking at financial return, quarterly financial returns. That's the life cycle of these private stakeholders. Public stakeholders, they're looking at election cycles. When is the next election cycle and what do I need to report to my constituents? Academia, as you know, longer time in terms of publication, the rigor, the research, and then of course technology, as Ryan was saying. It's going at its own pace much faster. So everyone has different, timelines, if you will. So your question is, given all the different timelines that each of these different stakeholders have, how do you address their individual timelines, but then acknowledge them as a group working together to have a common timeline that they can go to? And that is how we've set up our projects, where we phase it for MVVPs. So for faster timelines, like the technology and the private sector, we have to move and show some initial results, right? But for longer sector or longer term, like academia or even the public sector, there is another phase that we can go to. But at the end of the day, the projects that we are doing are multi-generational infrastructure change, right? That timeline is much larger when you're talking about energy, housing, that kind of lifestyle. But that's the ultimate mission, or that's the ultimate goal. But it doesn't mean that before you get to that ultimate goal, you can't have milestones or kind of these wins where you might get a white paper, or you might, have a pilot that goes into a community, or you might be able to show some sort of ROI to the private sector. Those things can still happen, knowing that you have a much longer timeline for that specific goal. So absolutely, it's very hard, but you need to be able to acknowledge coming in, those are the different timelines, but also I would add, we have acknowledged the different incentives that each of these different stakeholders come in. So in academia, we know the big stakeholder or the big incentive is publication, right? Publish or perish, right? So we need to be able to create something that allows them to be able to publish, or for them to show service or learning or teaching, whatever allows them to survive and thrive in academia. Again, private sector, we know that they need to provide some sort of return or some sort of business development, concrete to show to their stakeholders. Public sector, we know that they need to report to their constituents. At the end of the day, they need to be voted in and they need to be able to show that. So once we understand each of these different stakeholders and what their incentives are, what drives them and what their timelines are, then we can meet in the middle and figure out how to move forward. And that's what we do in terms of building public-private partnerships, right? We have to be able to find commonality with each of these different players, know that they have different incentives, but know that we can leverage their resources and share the risk if we can do it together.
Yeah, I really like what you're saying, and I'm going to build a little bit on the idea of that multi-generational and the competing incentives and life cycles, because I think that very much frames the reality that we're all living in. And I think this question kind of gets to the heart of everything we're talking about, because one thing that's really important to remember is that the pace of AI does not have to be the pace that we are experiencing right now. That is a choice, and that is a choice that's being made by a very, very small group of very wealthy, privileged people. And their incentives are very, very clear to the people that are reading kind of between the lines. And the nature of the AI that's being developed right now and kind of literally sold to us as what we should be using is also not the way it has to be. If you're not an AI scholar, you might think this is AI just goes fast and it looks like this. but that's not at all true. There are many, many ways that AI can grow. There's many, many ways that AI can proceed. There's many, many priorities that AI can be used for. So it's really important that you don't forget that you are living in a series of choices that are largely being made for somebody else's good. And so we need to be incredibly careful about how much we just assume that is the pond in which we swim. I could, of course, give you a ton of historical analogies where that didn't go that great. And the other thing is that in terms of how do we, there's all these different metronomes going, like Deborah's talking about, there's all these different metronomes. How do we choose which metronome we're gonna sync up? There's all these competing values. Who's gonna win? And if you do research in Canada, if you are funded by SSHRC or one of the other federal funding, my understanding, including the introduction to this very panel, is that you have made a commitment to truth and reconciliation. And that is a real thing. That is not just a feeling. That is an actual policy. It is an actual commitment. And that means that, we actually have OCAP here in Canada, which is like ownership, control, access, and possession of data. So when it comes time for you to look at your competing values and figure out, who is going to get prioritized, whose metronome is going to get to be in charge, how much are you actually considering the commitment that you have made by signing on that dotted line to truth and reconciliation, or is our academic use of AI just going to be one more time where we look at our First Nations communities and kind of shrug and say, sorry, it's going so fast. That is in your power. That is a choice you get to make.
I just want to speak to that, and it's, being on this AI ride, it is in all of our hands, but we're competing against a lot of money for awareness, marketing, and memes. These are things that are driving society, right? These are, how do we slow it down? How can we slow it down?
These are things you're being told are driving society.
Yeah. Okay. But if everybody is making the same, decides one weekend, hey, let's all make avatar images using the Studio Ghibli ChatGPT thing is the thing I'm referencing. How does that happen? How can we have that moment where we're saying, let's slow down? We
focus on the fact that everybody didn't. Some people did, and because of the amplification machine, it felt like everybody. But there were people that didn't, and There were people that were listening to what you were doing or what you wanted to do. And we just stay focused on that, amplify that.
Okay. Good. Are there any further questions?
Yes, there's many questions coming in.
Oh boy, 5 minutes.
Okay, and limited time. So the next question is, how can we, as educators having to wrestle with AI, improve literacy without feeding big tech and participating in the destruction of our ecosystems?
I want to take that.
So the latter one on the ecosystem, so yeah, when everyone was using Studio Ghibli AI, right? So my immediate thought was the data centers, right?
Yeah.
So the data centers are a problem. We don't have a solution for it right now. The amount of energy that's being used to support making, Studio Ghibli characters is extraordinarily high. Less talked about, but just as important, is the water consumption and the water use that's also connected to this. So at the end of the day, water, energy, those types of resources that are necessary to support these large language models and AI is extraordinarily high. And we don't have an answer to it at this point. And this is the broader issue, that we don't have an answer for climate change or an answer that we're willing to make the hard decisions on right now. And that is something that I think should always be front and center to most AI discussions. There's the advancements, but there is also the critical natural resources and environmental considerations that AI generates. The other side is the question about, learning and teaching and students. And I think, we talked about this a little bit in the green room too, which is the critical thinking, right? So we're lucky, I think, for most of us here, that we grew up without AI as the tool. The next generation, the digital natives, the AI natives, have that as the singular tool. So if you don't have that as a foundation in terms of us critically thinking about this, and you go straight to AI, I think that's where we start to have issue with, right? Because I think we need to be transparent and say, yes, we all use AI. We need to be transparent and say, I think it's an important tool that could be used to complement your work and your thinking, but it can't be the singular thing that you go to immediately, and you can't just copy and paste or pull whatever is being coded immediately from that, right? That's when we start to have issues, and that's when I don't think, if you don't have that critical learning or that analytical thinking grounded, that you're able to differentiate and be able to add your own nuance to it, that we, I think as educators, need to think how to reconcile with.
Any more?
Yeah. So the next question from the audience is, given that large language models are trained on biased data that reflect dominant knowledge, how can we help diversify this knowledge to also represent the marginalized?
One thing first of all, something like image generation, I find incredibly problematic, and I have no hope for, and I see such little utility for it that I'm willing to throw it in the garbage right now and say, I'm never going to use an image generator again. I've seen such horrible things from it. I don't even want to tell you what I've seen. I've seen it make people cry, right? It's really bad. There's some really harmful things that come from this technology. I'm going to take the large out and say just language models. That's something you can actually work with. You can actually attach documents, prompt and train and create your own chatbots or agents, whatever you want to call them, that do reflect different diverse communities and can be used in such, and I've seen, and this is already happening. There's already incredible projects happening, people trying to save Indigenous communities across the world. And they're doing incredible things, not just trying to save this, but they've realized it's not just the AI. We have to use the AI and we have to complement it with a teacher. So you have this elder who is teaching a wider variety of students who are also using this AI to support themselves. So I have a lot of hope for language models generally, but there's, again, when we say Gen AI, we're lumping a lot of things into this term, but I see there is hope for that. Yeah. Anyone want to pick up on that, or?
I think everything you've said is bang on, and I think there's no, like Deborah was saying, there's no simple, easy answer to any of that. I think one thing to keep in mind is that we are already modifying the large language models. Like if we let large language models just go and use ChatGPT, we would get the most horrible things back. I mean, you're absolutely correct. Like unregulated AI produces very, very horrible stuff. Like it's a mirror that you probably don't want to look into. And so there are already millions of humans whose job it is to kind of retrain the AI tools that have been trained on, all of this giant amount of borrowed, purchased, and stolen words. And they're kind of teaching it to be less horrible. And it could also be used to kind of be more inclusive, like not only use the ideas about various concepts that are said the most number of times in the words that it sucked up. Like you could use humans to do that. In fact, Google did try to use humans to do that, and the backlash was immediate and very strong, that they were producing biased AI, and this was like woke and all of this stuff. And I'm not saying that Google did a good job. I'm certainly no Google stan, but one thing that was really interesting to me is that the media that covered it said they're making their AI biased. And I thought that's a very serious problem that they're framing it that way, because that's making it sound like all of the other AI is value neutral, when it very much is not.
Do you want to speak to that? We've pretty much run out of time.
Last word.
I'm willing to give Deborah the last word on this.
No, that's fine. We can-
Okay, yeah. Yeah, Corinne.
Thank you so much to our panelists, Heather Krause, Deborah Lamb, our monitor, Ryan Morrison. A really thoughtful conversation on AI technologies in the context of our theme of reframing togetherness. On behalf of the Federation for the Humanities and Social Sciences and George Brown College, some thank yous to the Big Thinking Lecture Series sponsors, Universities Canada, and the session sponsors, Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council, and also SAGE. If you wish to revisit this conversation or tell your friends and colleagues who are not here today to hear it, the video will be available online in the coming days. And then if you want to have this kind of conversation again, we're back at it tomorrow with the environments of togetherness, again in this space at this time, Monday, June 2nd, 12:15 to 1:15. And I close by saying merci et je vous souhaite une très bonne journée. Enjoy the rest of Congress.